Salutations, everyone! Welcome back to another Total Warhammer 3 Mortal Empires guide. Obviously, this is still in beta, so everything is subject to change, but today we will be covering the Wood Elves. This is not a faction I expect to have lots of things change in Immortal Empires, so hopefully this guide will last for a while. This will follow a similar structure to my other guides. We'll cover the faction, how they play, any unique mechanics. We'll talk a little bit about their units, following into economy, technology, and then finally the various lords, starting locations, and starting moves. Those will all be chaptered below so that you should be able to just simply click and skip to what you need. Hopefully, you enjoy this. So, before we do anything else, I'm just going to quickly win these battles here. Just ignore exactly what I'm doing. Basically, the Wood Elves have major settlements followed up by minor settlements. I need to be able to show you minor settlements without you missing the start for Orion here with Bane Elf Lord. So the Elves' long-term goal of the game is to restore the Oak of Ages to its full prominence, which means you have to get the fourth health 500 and then survive the final battle events of the game. It starts, thankfully, it starts at level 1. Thankfully, you can just upgrade it all the way to level 4 just using cash. I do recommend that you start the upgrade immediately. At the beginning, it reduces corruption and has a half-decent garrison, and then every level above it, it boosts your growth. And at the highest level, it gives even more benefits. Also, as the tree increases, it will increase growth, relations, and starting at level 3, it will decrease upkeep. So this can be a very powerful thing to get going. The other reason you want to upgrade it is it unlocks the ability to confederate these two elven nations right nearby. You'll get missions to do so. So the Wood Elves, outside of their forest, and Orion's a bit of an exception. Usually magical forest, which is their unique settlement, is combined with a major settlement. That's not the case with Orion. Orion has the Oak of Ages and a separate settlement, but the Wood Elves have very large settlements, and they have really good garrisons, but they use some very interesting mechanics to function. Let's get into that. But first off, you want to upgrade the Wood Elf settlements whenever you can. It is a huge boost to their nation because usually you'll be functioning a whole area out of one settlement, and we'll get into that in a bit. But the Wood Elves have what they call kindred, or well, I think it's called kindred. They just call it population surplus here. Unlike other factions where you need the population surplus to level up your capital, um, your settlement building, basically, Wood Elves don't. They just use cash, which is quite handy. And they also don't use it to build or upgrade their barracks buildings. They do use it on their military support buildings. They do use it on their upper level garrison buildings, and they do use it for their infrastructure, which is basically their income building. And it builds up over time, and then you have to pay a cost and the population surplus to develop it. It's pretty unique that you actually have to use population to build buildings. No other faction really has this. And um, we'll get into that later, but almost every major Wood Elf settlement has building in it. But this does mean the Wood Elves can develop their settlements and get very strong units quickly, but they have trouble building up to get good income, stability, and trade resources. So the Wood Elves are a very interesting faction where you will unlock high-level infantry, archers, and cavalry pretty quickly, but you will struggle to support them for some time, which supports the whole Wood Elf gameplay. Let's get into it. So every major forest has a central settlement, which is usually your Wood Elf capital. If you play as the other two, there's three other Elven lords. The only exception is Durthu up here. Arguelon does not has a similar mechanic to Orion, but the other two have capital settlement with a forest in it, and I'll try to remember to mention that later. But this forest is withered right now, and it builds up based off battles, as you can see, battles, buildings, events. If especially since this is the Oak of Ages, it builds up if you heal other forests around the map and various other rituals encountered. But the key is the pacified heathlands, and also if they have hostile heathlands, it declines. If the heathlands are, you go over here, you will see that this says, hey, this is a major glade. Pacify nearby minor glades to bring peace. So this, as you'll see, there's these little icons scattered around the map. These mean that these are minor forests that supply uh, the major forest. So if you got them either as an ally or you own them yourself, you will get a bonus towards growth. As you'll see right now, it's negative. That's because Orion starts off at war with Aravon, and Arvon's heathlands are considered hostile. So if we were to march in and take over, which we will, even though we'll lose units, don't do exactly what I just did there. Actually do what I did exactly there. Otherwise, Grom the Paunch gets that. You don't want him to have it. So we've marched in. We've seized the settlement. Now, the Wood Elves can't build units in minor settlements, not like major settlements. You'll notice there is a capital building, which you can't upgrade. Gives really good control and reduced corruption and a half-decent garrison. Then if you go down here, you'll see that there are 4 options. Sometimes there's a 5th, which is the research resource, which tends to give a little bit of income and then a bonus. It's worth... I've never really used this bonus for resource buildings. You could. I find it much better to use the infrastructure buildings. You have then a choice between building a garrison building, which provides obviously a stronger garrison, growth in all your provinces, which, as I said, the Wood Elves desperately need population surplus to grow their cities and make money. This makes it harder to take, gives it a stronger garrison. It also heals your units in the area better, which means it's a very solid choice if you're fighting enemies. Especially because if you remember, the ways to get the forest health going again can also be from battles. You'll see we have a +4 up there from fighting 2 battles. So if you're going to be fighting a lot of battles against an enemy on a front, this is a good building to build. The next one, World Route Pathway, gives a small garrison, increases growth larger, increases recruitment cost and global recruitment cost. This basically would allow you to use this global recruitment thing for a price similar to what your capital regions have. It's very useful, especially if for some reason we're fighting up here in Karak Norn or even Karak Azgaraz way up here. We're not going to have time to keep marching back here to recruit units, so building a building there would allow us to up there. Next one, Sacrificial Slaughter Grounds increases control. I've never had control with the Wood Elves in their minor settlements. Their capital one is easily manageable. Gives more loot if you're fighting battles, raising, or doing other stuff. Can be pretty powerful, especially if there's strong enemy settlements nearby. Build one of these, raise the settlement, make tons of money, destroy this building, replace it with another. Or if you're dealing with corruption problems, chaos, or the vampires, for example, or even Skaven. Definitely one of my least favorite buildings here to build, but it has its purpose. It also allows you to train dryads. This one allows you to just train glade guards, which is your basic infantry archer unit. And the final one, a foraging grove, increases growth, decreases cost. It's almost as bad as this one. The only reason you might build it is for the growth bonus early on. You're usually better off with World Route Pathway, or even better, Waystones to defend this land, because the Wood Elves tend to have 1 army per forest at most. So you're not going to be able to defend all your borders all the time. You'll have to rely on your garrisons to dissuade any enemies, obviously, unless you're allied to the people around you. Now, if we look over here, we'll see that this is a pacified region owned by me, another Wood Elf, an ally, or is raised. So now this negative Heathland is now a +1. So if we were to pass forward, the Oak of Ages would go up by 1. And once you got it to a certain level, it would progress. The other forests have a simple 0 to 100. You hit 100, you press this purple button, you do a Ritual of Rebirth. 3 armies try to invade. They're strong. You can attack them early and wipe them out. If you do, they are significantly weaker. You complete the ritual. It allows you to build a unique building. Obviously not this one. In each of the healed forests, at which point you usually then move your army to a different area. Now, if we zoom out, here are the different forests around the world. You'll see that they are very far away from each other. Two that are closer, those ones. So how do you get there? That is another Wood Elf mechanic. The Wood Elves have access to the Deep Root. The Deep Roots are a set of pathways that allow an army in the region, if they go into the unique underway stance, it allows you to teleport them between the different forests around the map. Be aware there is, I think, a 10-turn cooldown. You'll get various events that reduce it to like 5 for a while. So if you send an army, don't expect to be able to send it back to defend your lands, which means usually what you do is you take one forest. Obviously, the exception here is with Orion and Durthu's Oak of Ages. You try and heal one forest, or at least build up the settlement enough so that you can defend it, and then you move on to another forest, and again, and again, and again. Until you've healed, I think it requires at least 3 of them to be healed on top of the Oak of Ages. Actually, this one is 8 to get a long campaign victory. I think the short one, yeah, just Ritual Rebirth in Athel. But you're going to have to heal 3 first to get it. Now, the other mechanic the Wood Elves have, and this one could change, is the Wood Elves have various offices. Basically, if you have a Lord that meets the requirements, most of them, the bottom row is level 1, the top row is level 3. If you get them, you can move them into this office, and they will gain different bonuses. As you can see, there are a variety of different ones. I tend to use your starting legendary lord for offensive stuff, so I tend to pick the ones that are slightly more defensive as things go. Unfortunately, none of them have like faction-wide effects. They tend to just affect one army. But if you're going to use treemen, for example, putting a Spirit of the Hunt in there will help. Now, Orion has a special event that gets the Wild Hunt event, which boosts the power of these. The other factions have other different mechanics. This is Orion's. I'll try and talk about them when you get. The Wood Elves also have another unique resource. In case you haven't noticed, the Wood Elves are kind of unique with all their different mechanics. This is Amber. So Amber you get when you heal forests, or basically when you get healed forests. You can spend Amber on unique technology. This center circle is very powerful technology, but you use up an Amber each time you research it. So we'll talk about this later, but be aware that healing forests gives you huge technological bonuses. So how the Wood Elves play is a very defensive faction. You do not want to let your capital settlement fall. In the case of Orion or Durthu, you don't want to let Oak of Ages fall for any of the Wood Elves. I don't know if it still applies in Immortal Empires beta, but in Total Warhammer 2, if you lost the Oak of Ages at any point, it was an instant defeat for your faction, and the Beastmen factions tend to target it, which means upgrading it is very useful. I haven't tested it because I haven't had a Beastman army in any of my games actually even be a conceivable threat to it. Just my advice, don't test it. Don't let any faction take the Oak of Ages. So the Wood Elves, you defend, you move out to attack anybody who attacks you, pacify the Heathlands, then retreat back to your forest, heal the forest, move on to a next one, rinse and repeat around the world. Now, different areas have different events, and eventually you will get missions. There'll be a mission, come down here, fight a encounter in the woods, which will be a random event that pops up on the map, a circle that you walk into. You win it, you immediately can confederate Orion's camp. Now, that doesn't apply on some of the forests held by enemies, like Forest of Plume, Haunted Forest, or the Sacred Pools, but it does apply for the other elven factions. The interesting exception is the Gaian Vale, which is the capital of the High Elf Ariel's faction, Avalorn. At some point, I find it around 25 or so turns, Ariel, you'll get a message. Ariel calls for aid. There'll be a random event where the Gaian Vale will be turned into a ruin, which really weakens the Elariel faction, by the way. It doesn't happen in that campaign, just the Wood Elf one. But it will become unoccupied. The Wood world routes will be cleared and you can teleport in and take over. Be aware that when you do teleport in, there's a very strong Chaos army sitting right there. They're not at war with you, but if you try and colonize the settlement without dealing with them, I find they tend to declare war on you, and since your army has lost half its health from colonizing, they tend to win. So when you do teleport in, go with a strong army, kill the Chaos army, and then recolonize. Now, I mentioned encounters in the woods, and that is the last thing to cover here. They're major mechanics. You'll notice that this says resolved encounters and events. Periodically, there will be an event that fires called Whispers in the Woods, usually. And that means that somewhere around the forest, and you'll want to click on it to find out where it is, a little glowing circle will appear on the map. If you march an army over there, you will trigger an event. Sometimes it's like, the treemen in your forest have become evil. Do you want to spare them, gain forest health, but get a corruption penalty? Or do you want to kill them, have an upkeep penalty, also heal the forest? Or do you want to ignore it and come back later? Now, that's not a huge problem. Sometimes the encounters are hostile armies, in which case you'll have 3 to 4 turns to muster an army, march in. If you attack early, they will be weaker, and sometimes you'll get an ambush on them, kill them. Otherwise, eventually they will spawn and they will attack your settlement. Be aware they are usually fairly strong armies, so unless you have built garrison buildings or even have an army in the area, they can very easily take one of your settlements. The Wood Elves are not an adventuring faction. You do not care what goes on outside of the borders of your heathland, really. You do a little bit, but not immensely. And that's pretty much it for the unique mechanics for the Wood Elves. Okay, let's talk units. So there are 2 types of Wood Elf units. They are the Elves, and then there are the Treemen. And then there's also birds, but we're not going to cover that much. Oh, okay. For some reason, I seem to have placed where they appear. Maybe Orion can't get them. I can't remember offhand. Basically, the types of units is you have here they are. You have Dryads, which are creature infantry, which basically wood trees. Think Ents from Lord of the Rings, but small ones at this point. And then you've got your standard elves. And as different factions have different bonuses. Your Dryads, in this case, are your melee line infantry. They are really the only thing that can win a melee fight in your faction outside of your cavalry. The first level 1 is a fairly good level 1 infantry. I have seen it do lots of damage. An army filled with Dryads is a very powerful early game threat. The downside is they are weak against armor, so don't throw them up against anything like the Dark Elves, the Dwarves, the Warriors of Chaos, or really any faction with armor. But someone like the Skaven or the Bretonnian Peasants, they will easily slaughter. Next level of the Forest Spirit tree, continuing with the woods, you unlock a hero, a Branch Wraith, which is a tree hero. I believe it has spell casting. Is a wizard. I don't tend to use them that much. I don't tend to use tree units that much, but they are very powerful. You also unlock Treekin, which are 16 units. So unlike the Dryads, which have like 100 or so, obviously scaling with the size of your unit. The Treekin are a very powerful melee frontline unit. They don't tend to get a ton of kills, but they also tend to not die. They're armored. They're really tricky to kill. They are a siege attacker. Not that the Wood Elves are going to be attacking many upgraded settlements, but if you do, they're strong. They also cause fear. Overall, if you need a strong frontline unit to handle powerful enemies, like the dwarves or something else, this is the unit you want to bring to the fight. They might not kill a lot of enemy units, but they won't tend to die that fast. And then further up, you have Zotes, which don't really know how to describe them. They're not really trees anymore. They're kind of like, I have no idea how to describe them. You'll have to see them yourself. They're a monstrous unit. You get 16 of them. They hit hard. They're armor piercing, so definitely bring them against the dwarves or other heavily armored factions. They also have access to some base spells, which they don't use Winds of Magic for, which is very powerful. They can heal people in an area around them. They also can strengthen physical resistance, a siege attacker, and cause fear. They're a very solid frontline unit. And then finally, the final tree spirit unit are treemen. Treemen are a one entity unit. They are very powerful. They hit hard. They're armor piercing. The only downside to them is they don't tend to tie up enemies as much as the larger units do. They tend to be one unit standing in the midst of enemies. So if you're going to use treemen, use them with elven or dryad support and make them the tip of your spear point that you're fighting with. Otherwise, they're good at fighting enemy heroes and others, but don't expect that a front line of 3 of them to stop an army. The army will simply go around them. Now, we'll talk about the elven cavalry before we get to the elven archers and infantry. The elves actually have some pretty good cavalry, which is slightly odd since they live in the forest. Their cavalry is deer mounted, rather than horse mounted in many cases. Think the stag from The Hobbit that the Wood King Thranduil used, and you'll get a similar aspect of some of their stuff. Obviously, there are some little bits of it, horses as well, but they are a solid cav unit. They flank, they hit hard, they're shielded, most of them. You can also get horse archers. I don't recommend the horse archers. If you're going to bring anything, bring the shock cav. Level 1 Glade Riders are okay. Ideally, you want to get up to Wild Riders. Wild Riders are amazingly powerful. Ideally, the ones with shields, just so they don't die to range units as easily. They're very powerful. They're almost the top tier cav unit that you get in a level 2 staple. They're on par almost with the Bretonnian Knights. I love having 1 or 2 units of them. They'll get hundreds of kills. They'll run off the enemy. They can even spar fairly well with other heavy cavalry without dying. Further up, you get the Sisters of the Thorn, which are a magical cavalry with spellcasting abilities. They can summon, they cannot summon, but they can weaken everything around them, and they can use a Shield of Thorns to reflect melee damage back at an attacker. If they use this on themselves while they charge into an enemy cav unit or infantry unit, they can do some serious damage in retaliation. They also resist physical damage, meaning they're very good at physical combat and can easily deal with similar leveled cavalry. And the final one is the Great Stag Knights, the crown and glory of the elven cavalry line. Still don't know why the elves have a cavalry line. Anyway, they hit hard. They're armor piercing, which makes them very useful because the other elven cavalry units are not armored piercing. They hit hard, they move fast, their charge bonus is nuts. Just don't leave them in melee combat without that charge bonus. Charge them in, do damage, unless the enemy unit routes or is dying easily. Eventually pull them out and charge again. They're solid, they're really good. They don't have the most units. They're only 32 out of 60, but they more than hold their own, and they're a very worthwhile addition to your army, giving it some very needed mobility and hard-hitting flanking damage. Now, finally, to the units you guys have all been waiting for, the Elven Infantry. The Elven Infantry is very, very interesting to play with. There's a lot of range units, but even their melee units are quite interesting to examine. So let's start with their infantry. They have Spearmen, Eternal Guards. The Eternal Guards are probably going to be your meat and potatoes elven infantry unit, or melee infantry unit for most of the game. They are not great at killing things, but they have a very high melee defense stat. They are spears with shields, meaning they don't die to range or anything else. They reflect charge, obviously being spearmen, and in generally they're just a very good frontline unit behind which your elven archers will massacre the enemy. I don't recommend the ones without shields, mainly because then if you fight anybody with ranged, they die. Further up, you have access to the Glade Captain, which is kind of like a sniper hybrid unit. They're half decent melee combat, much better at ranged. They allow your army to march further. So I recommend sticking one of these in each of your armies if you can. And generally, they're a good hero unit. They can boost your nearby archers. They can do fairly good damage on their own, and they don't tend to die instantly in melee combat, which is a plus. Plus, they boost income. So if you have one in your army and it's sitting in your capital settlement, you'll make more money. Then you have the actual damage infantry for the Wood Elves. I don't tend to use them that much, but they are very solid. You have the War Dancers. Dual Sword War Dancers are very much killing units. They tend to be deployed. I can get to them. They tend to be deployed to charge into the enemy, do damage. They have physical resistance. They're very good at flanking. They're not particularly good at holding a front line, though. They're much better for flanking or killing weak infantry. They have an ability that can boost their melee defense at the cost of their melee attack, which makes them hold up a little bit better in melee combat, and they're a little bit harder to hit. Physical resistance. Then you have the version with spears. Again, better against monsters in cav than infantry. Still not what I would call the most amazing melee. Finally, you have the Wildwood Rangers, which are kind of interestingly, they are a glaive infantry. Think spear, but with an axe kite on the end. They're quite interesting to use. They have a very good bonus versus large enemies, especially if you're in the forest. So if you hide them in the woods, they will massacre monster units with relative ease. They hit hard. They're armor piercing, which is very much needed for the Wood Elves. They're a generally good damage infantry unit. They're still not necessarily worth bringing too many of them because the Wood Elf's strength really does lie in its range. You also have Blade Singers, which, as you'll see, there's a little arrow that popped up to the right. That means they're required to build an armory. Yet, be aware you do need to build this armory in order to get things with shields where you need stuff. As well as more archers, but you want this for the Eternal Guard with shields. Blade Singers are a infantry killing unit rather than a monster killing unit. They do their job, they do it fairly well. They have magical attacks, so they're good against enemies that have physical resistance, high armor, or are ethereal. Think banshees for the vampire counts, for example. They hit hard, they move fast, they are physically resistant. Bring them if you want to have some melee offense. I tend to play more defensively as the Wood Elves, but it's up to you. Now, Wood Elf Archers. Wood Elf Archers are arguably the best archers in the game. There are a couple arguing exceptions. Dark Elf, crossbowmen with shields, stuff like that. I find these are available earlier. They hit hard. They're pretty much good at all levels. And in general, you'll want to bring a lot of them or their upgrades to the battle. It is important to note that you are able to build Glade Guards in your base settlements, but you want to build a archery range in order to get the customization. The Hagbane tip here, can't really show it that easily. Basically, they have a poison which weakens units they shoot. They also do, as we'll see, magical damage. I tend not to use Hagbane that much. They might be good against infantry armies like the Skaven or Dwarves. I tend to, however, go with Starfire Shafts, mainly because they have armor-piercing missiles, which is a weakness that the Wood Elves struggle to kill early on. Anything that can penetrate armor, always worth having. It notes good range here. This is because the Wood Elves have 170 range. Most archers have 160 or less. Wood Elves can buff this range even further. You'll get a volley off before anyone else does, and because the Wood Elf archers hit hard, fire fast, especially if they do magic damage and flaming attacks as well as armor penetrating, they can fight almost any foe in the game with Starfire Shafts. Further up, you get Waystalkers, which is a purely ranged hero unit, again buffing your units, doing ranged damage. They can kill heroes by sniping them from a very far distance. They are not as good in melee combat as, say, your Waste Stalkers, but they have their place again. Mobility, boosting income. They're worth having in your army. I tend to build them into hero killers, sniping enemies from long range, killing them out. Then you have your right. I'm on the wrong here. Oops. You have Deep Wood Scouts. So Deep Wood Scouts fire from further. They are a master ambusher where they can fire in any direction while moving, which is a very good buff. The base Wood Elf units do have fire while moving, and this is what strengthens them. But these guys can stay invisible in any terrain when they're not shooting. I think it's while they're not shooting. Could be while they're shooting. Um, these allow for some crazy ambushes and flanks. It makes it hard for the enemy to target you at range with artillery or other archers because your archers either kill them from range or they are not visible on the map for artillery to shoot them. Uh, they are a pretty much straight upgrade to the Glade Guards. They are more expensive to build and maintain, though. Not immensely. I tend to immediately grab them and try and get their upgrade here. These Swift Shiver Shards. Um, the Swift Shiver Shards fire 2 arrows at a time. It's a pretty interesting. Oops. Sorry. Pretty interesting buff for them. They do magic damage. They are not armor penetrating as far as I understand it, which means the armor penetrating Glade Guards might be more useful depending on your enemy. But the additional range, the massive increase in missile strength from 20 or 16 all the way up to 33 makes this a very worthwhile upgrade. Does require an army to build. And finally, you have Way Watchers. Now, Way Watchers, the elite Elven Archers, 190 range. You can get it over 200 with upgrades and various hero and lord abilities. They have armor piercing. They hit from hard. They hit from far away. They are invisible. They have a lovely armor piercing melee damage boost if no enemies are nearby, meaning they will shred enemy units unless the enemy quickly closes. Their only weakness really is Cav, but they're half decent in melee combat as well. I recommend for the Elven armor armies, you tend to have a strong line of either Eternal Guards or Dryad Demon unit. Tie up the enemies while you destroy them from range with the archers, and then flank with Cav. They have no artillery, the Wood Elves, but they do have a couple other units here that's worth mentioning. They have Spell Singers, which are your standard mage unit. Pick whichever ones you like. I like the Spell Singer's Life for the healing and buffs, but you could pick some damage as well. They have monstrous flying ones, so you can get Great Eagles. Great Eagles are not to be underestimated, even though they are a starting flying unit. They hit hard, they have their purpose. They're good at flanking, killing artillery, running off archers, or even just fighting other flying units. It's almost always worth having 1 or 2 in an army. Further up, you have Hawk Riders, which are flying elven archers. They're okay. They're particularly good if you're fighting a faction with tons of cav, where you're not sure your infantry will be able to protect your archers. But there's less of them. They thankfully are armor piercing. They tend to lose in melee combat against other flying units, but they're pretty useful at hitting the enemies overall. I don't tend to use them as much as I should, but they're pretty neat. And finally, the Wood Elves get a dragon. They get a forest dragon that has poison. It has magic damage. It is armor piercing. It is in generally a very good unit. I recommend you have at least 1 in a fully upgraded Elven army. It makes a difference. They tend not to die so long as you keep them protected so they don't get isolated. They don't have as high leadership as some of the other Elven units, but they hit hard. They fly. They have a really good Noxious Breath ability, which hits enemies, poisons them. It's really useful. And once you get to this point, though, you should already kind of know what you're using. It's very rare to get an Elven settlement to level 5 before you heal a forest and move on to the next one, but it's worth it. Okay, let's talk the economy. So the Wood Elves have, as I said, a different economy method where they have to use population to level up their income buildings. This could change. I don't think it will. Um, does well. This is obsolete. If it doesn't, right. Uh, basically, using population, they can get a growth, small income, and furs, along with casualty replenishment building, increased money building, and wine, or public order and a handful of trades, along with some control and growth. You would think you would want to build the grapevines for the double the money of the other two. I don't recommend it. For the earliest one you build, I recommend the Trapper's Den for the growth. Wood elves grow very slowly, unless you need the population to upgrade the income buildings in the future. Then I recommend you get the public order craftsman tree building. Wood elves have public order problems even in your capital settlements. Unless you have an army in them, your settlements tend to get unhappy. This just helps with that, plus a little bit of trade goods and growth. And then finally, once you can afford it, usually when you're around settlement level 4, you want to build a winery and upgrade it. Now, it's important to note that you should build a garrison in basically every major Wood Elf settlement immediately. Reason being, it reduces the upkeep of your armies, makes your army stronger when under siege, and provides you with a very strong garrison. Fully upgraded, these guys can take on almost any army in the world in a defensive battle, except for player armies, obviously. They're good, they're strong, they're cheap. The increased discount is amazing. It's also worth mentioning they can build a forge unit, which decreases the cost of buildings. Plus, you need it to build some better units. And then over here, this is worth mentioning as well. They have this Spell Singers building, which reduces your corruption around you. And if you upgrade it to level 2, increases the forest healing of your local magical forest. And then there is a forest lookout building, which kind of is the same here as the Skaven detection building. But if you build a forest caves and you build a forest patrol, Skaven basically can't build undercities there because you will have a 90 detection rate. Or out of 100, you will detect that if they build anything that takes more than 9 revealing of them. Very powerful, very useful. I tend to throw down maybe the forest lookout here, the hero protection to get it to level 2, 50% hero chance, 50% detection, and some other garrison plus control. It's worth it if you're having trouble dealing with the Skaven. Probably be more useful if you're playing as other players who keep it alive. This would be a last-ditch desperate attempt to control plagues, Skaven, undercities, or corruption. You'll note that the elves have lots of trading resources from their buildings. This is because the elves don't get tons of resource buildings from expansion. They might get 1 or 2. This actually encourages the Wood Elves to trade with other factions, and they're pretty good at trading, assuming you can get the alliances, which, of course, if they're bordering you, helps with healing your forests. Being friends with your neighbors is a very good thing if you can pull it off with the Wood Elves. The Dark Elves and other semi-darker factions, like the Greenskin, and even to some degree the Skaven, don't particularly hate you. They don't love you, neither do the good factions or anything. Chaos factions despise you. Beastmen will try and kill you all the time. But everyone else you can kind of get along with. Let's talk technology. So the Wood Elves have a completely unlocked tech tree from the beginning, with the exception of the Amber. You've got a path that at the final level up top, you'll follow the Kadai or the Kithurai at the bottom. And if you go the bottom route, you'll make friends with the Dark Elves. If you go to the top, you will make friends with the High Elves. Plus, you'll heal your forest faster. And then in the middle, you can get a Worship of Cain, which boosts all your units as well and fears enemies that are fighting. This is worth getting in the long run, but it takes 84 turns of research at a minimum. As far as I'm aware, the Wood Elves really have no easy way to speed up their research. They could use spell slingers to steal. If you want to get to that higher level tech quicker, it's worth using. I find the Wood Elves don't tend to have an economy that can support constant hero actions, but it's up to you. So obviously, first tech, you want to research it. Then you've got a choice. If you go north, you'll be supporting At least initially, elf infantry and melee and range resistance. This tends to lead to more income boosts or upkeep bonuses. It is worth noting that if you can get up to Ladriel, Lady of the Mists, you'll get good relations with Bretonia, and you move further. Moving further is always good. If you're Orion or Durthu, relations with Bretonia are always useful. Um, Otherwise, it might be worth going south, where you heal your forests if you win battles. This is something a faction who's constantly fighting would particularly use. You increase bonuses of elf cavalry versus large, again, making it easier to kill monsters. And at the bottom, it says missile strength plus 10%. This is worth getting if you're going to use elven archers, which I sure hope you are. Then further, this is a great one. It boosts your unit's melee attack and your chance to ambush or not be ambushed. You want to snag this if you're at war a lot. In general, you want to take this at all. This allows you to ambush enemies when they march into your forest and wipe them out. Any ambush increased chance defense is always a solid thing. Down here, if you're going to use tree units, Zotes, Treemen, or Forest Dragons, we're snagging. Over here, if you're using melee elf infantry, snag it. If you're using range, it's not as important. This, general boost to elves. If you're going to use Forest Dragons, this is worth taking over here. This will give you more relations with the Dark Elves. You stack it, you can easily become best friends with Morathi or even Malekith using this. It's very strange. And finally, over here, if you have trouble with casualty replenishment, which I don't really find the Wood Elves have, this is worth snagging. Plus, if you're having corruption problems, clear it. Up north, it's just general boost to the High Elves. Cheaper construction of building is worth mentioning if you can pull it off. And then Wisdom of the Eagle Lords. If you're going to use Eagle units, you want to get this. Be aware, and it says, beware, this will make distant foes aware of you. You will get permanent sight over all magical forests. Some of the magical forests are owned by enemies. Others are bordered by enemies. You can very easily get a chain of war declarations given to you from people on the other side of the world. I actively avoid this tech unless I'm going to use Great Eagle. In the middle, you have your amber ones. There's a variety of different things you can pick. I tend to take the Wisdom of the Ash, which just boosts diplomacy with all factions. As the Wood Elves, you can be at war with everybody, but the less people you're at war with and can trade with, better off you are, plus increased ammunition. Other ones worth mentioning, casualty replenishment in other foreign territory is very useful. Wisdom of the Pines, if you're having trouble building up settlements quickly or you're starting new forests, can be handy. Wisdom of the Popular is a bit more adventuring. If you're traveling out and you're using global recruitment, this will help. The growth is not so amazing. I'd waste an amber on it, though. Wisdom of the Oak, yeah, I wouldn't take it. The boost to settlements is not massive. Plus, the guard is not amazing. This one, Wisdom of the Ancient, I wouldn't take this. It basically gives you a spell and make Lords of Beast cheaper. I've never found Lords of Beast worth overemphasizing. And then you've got Wisdom of the Cypress. If you raise Heathland settlements, this can help you build up your forest really quickly, and your armies will fight better and they won't burn to death. Wisdom of the Yew, this one can be very useful if you're going to use tree units, because it gives them poison, and it gives reload time reduction. So, that is the technology. Let's get into the starting situations. As you saw with Orion, we fought a battle at the beginning of this video, and then we took the settlement. You probably want to fight the first or second battle so you don't lose the 3 melee units that I did, because they were pretty decent units. You want to take Quenelles as soon as you can. If you don't, Grom will kill this guy and then swiftly move to take the settlement. Eventually, Grom tends to declare war on you. You could theoretically just abandon it and retreat to Athel, which is this whole forest area. Be aware, though, it will slow down your healing of the Oak of Ages considerably, because you will then have hostile heathlands, and you'll probably have to heal another forest before you can make much progress. Once you take the settlement, you can actually survive the next if the Bretonians try to attack you. So I recommend the first thing you do is either get the world route pathway so you can recruit more units, or waste stones. You're probably better off at this point building the world's root pathway, and then next turn recruiting more units. If you can, you want to move up and take out Orion, which is not that hard. The trick is getting there before Grom does. Grom is slightly harder to kill. If he attacks you first turn at higher level difficulties, you will lose the battle. So if you're playing at very hard or higher, I don't recommend taking this settlement turn 1. If anything, you almost want to go into encampment, train units, and take it after Grom takes it. Take him out, then move on, take out and raise massive Orcall, eliminate him from the game if you can, then deal with Aravon, which will be harder to do, but thankfully Bretonnian factions early on suck at this point. If they have a rework, it might change. I don't think it will. You have 3 other Wood Elf factions, 1 Woodsman, 2 Elves. They tend not to declare war at you. They don't love you. As you level up the Oak of Ages, they will grow care. You'll get Confederation missions. I believe one is win 3 battles against the dwarves. Another, I think, is capture a settlement. I could be wrong. They'll appear as missions, so keep an eye on your missions that they will give you, because they don't really explain that they're Confederation missions. And then, as I said, later on, you'll get missions to grab other areas. I recommend build up the Kingsglade, throwing down a garrison building as soon as you can afford it, and probably doing a craftsman's tree or a trapper's den to get the growth rate. Build this up. I wouldn't go to any other forest until Alariel calls for aid and opens up Gain Vale. It's like 25 to 40 turns game. At that point, move in, occupy Gain Vale. If you occupy it fast enough and the Dark Elves aren't too expansionistic, once you kill the Chaos Army, you can then leave and move to another forest. Gain Vale outside of the ritual tends not to be attacked that much. Maybe you put a Lord with a couple archers in there in case there's a counter in the woods that come to take it. Afterwards, you can go where you like. I tend to go for Loryn Forest next, because this is the most likely Wood Elf faction to die. Got Warriors of Chaos, you've got Norska, you've got Beastmen. This is one of their major targets. The Elven faction tends to not survive that well, so keeping them alive. You have win a battle against Norska, and you can confederate them and counter the woods. You can literally teleport there, move, and confederate them in 1 turn. It's worth doing. And then, if you can, Orion down here has win a battle against him, and then you confederate him. Just like that, you can get 3 forests. I don't find it much effort to go for the other ones. Haunted Forest is interesting because it's owned by a vampire faction. Be aware that Gorst has really powerful zombies if you do, and it will be hard for you to kill them with archers. Forest of Gloom I would avoid if you can, especially if the greenskins, Urzag the Prophet down here, is doing well. This tends to be a faction province that he attacks a lot. Gripvon Wood is owned by an anti-Wood Elf faction I'll talk about later. The Witchwood's owned by the Sisters of Twilight. There's really no reason to go after them. This would look like an opportune one. The downside is it's a Lizardman faction. So if you move in and attack it, you could easily have Lizardmen coming after you. By my recommendations, stick with Oak of Ages, Gain Vale, Loryn Forest, and Orion's Camp. If you're going for the long victory, you probably want to get the non-Wood Elf woods first. So these 2 over here, and then the Lizardmen before federating the other Wood Elves. Anyway, that's Orion's Start. Let's look at him as a Lord briefly. So he is king in the woods. So when Ariel is in his army, he protects her. His Cav does more damage, and it has better charge bonus. And in general, his archers do more damage. He has an interesting tree. He can focus into melee combat, or he can focus in range combat. I will point out the fact he has very low ammunition because he doesn't shoot arrows. He throws like javelins, meaning something like Bottomless Quiver, which boosts it a little bit higher, might be worth it. But it's only a 2 boost for 2 level ups. You're almost better off getting higher piercing shots or Fleet Finger and then throwing him into melee combat, where he will survive for a fair amount of time. He also has Hounds of Orion, kind of like golden hounds from the Lore of Metal. It will attack in an area. It does have decent damage. not amazing, but he comes with it, and you can use it 3 times, so might as well use it to kill weak infantry. Fox Talon up here is a long-range bombardment ability, doing magic damage. Again, gets it from the beginning. It's worth using. Outside of that, his blue line, I recommend, obviously, movement. If you're going to do a lot of fighting, Wonders of the Forest is valuable. Otherwise, Growth of the Forest should be what you focus on first. It'll allow you to build up your settlements faster. Since he's the legendary lord, you're going to be using him for that. Obscuring Canopy increases ambush chance, stacking with the tech that's like plus 60% ambush. Basically, anyone walks into your forest, you're going to be able to ambush them and kill them. This one's only good if you're having corruption problems. Tend not to. Afterwards, Open Branches is great, makes your recruited unit stronger, but more importantly, gives you a very needed global recruitment capacity. Afterwards, I would get the replenishment rate, which is 15% for the Wood Elves. I imagine that might get nerfed. All the other factions seem to have 6. If they don't, this is a great one to snag. It allows you to heal and fight more often. You could do this one. I would never do Swift Fingers. I might not even do Lightning Strike unless you're playing at high difficulty and being invaded by multiple armies at a time. Instead, going down Quartermaster to make your army cheaper, because Wood Elves have money problems. Helps a lot. Home Amongst the Boughs, 17%. 2, campaign, recruit rank is really nice. Outside of that, his red line is worth snagging Bolts of the Forest if you use range, otherwise customize it. You're going to do melee attack. I don't recommend Piercing Thorns immensely, though. You're probably better off doing Swinging Bows. Blade Guards and Eternal Guards and Dryads aren't likely to in melee combat, but War Dancers, Blade Singer, and Wildwood Rangers are, or even Ancient Bark or your Treeman. 6 physical resistance makes them very tanky. Outside of that, he has, at level 12, he gets Hunter's Javelins, making his javelins anti-large and boosting his missile strength considerably. Stacked with this, he has plus 30 missile strength easily. This improves his Hawk's Talon and gives him 100% more ammunition. And if you have Bottomless Quiver, that's 130. Basically, at that point, he just becomes a ranged unit that hits hard. Kind of a sniper anti-lord unit. This one, Hunter's Gather, is worth it. Allows you to build military buildings and recruit faster. You're going to be using this guy to do a lot of fighting. You don't want to use any other lords for taking new forests. You want to use him. This will be a way to do that. Eyes in the Forest. Better ambush chance. 100% plus ambush chance. Always good. Part of the Bow. The ability to spot units in forests. I don't find this to be a huge problem. Most battles don't take place inside forests, but if they do, this makes the Wood Elves the best at it. Plus, your units have bonuses towards fighting in the woods, and Never-Ending Hunt decreases the cooldown of your ability. Rain of Spines, get it when you can. Makes your archers better. Movement can be good, especially if you're using your Elven archers to skirmish. It will not protect them from cav or super fast units. Then you have a choice. You can do Howl the Forest, Sight Beyond Sight, or Trickster God. Pick which you're going to use. If you're going to do melee combat, Trickster God's great. Howl the Forest can also be great for melee combat. I tend to do Sight Beyond Sight, boost all the allies around you's missile damage. If you use Elven Archers, this is invaluable. Anyway, that is Orion's start. He does have a Way Stalker. Turn them into a sniper. Okay, here we go. Sisters of Twilight. This is 55 turns into a game, just because I wanted to show you what happens when you fully complete a ritual. Basically, you can build a... oh, did I not build it here? Oh, no, I am building it. Basically, you can build a building that gives attrition for enemy armies inside your forests, and another big bonus. It's very powerful. If you look here, here's what I was talking about by a garrison. This is a very strong garrison to fight with. Anyway, Sisters of Twilight start with the Witchwood. They start at war with Elven faction over here, and I believe Greenskin up north. Be wrong though. They have a very annoyingly large heathland right around here. Thankfully, it's not that hard to control. You can tend to control these 3 provinces with 1 turn marches. Controlling these 2 get a little bit trickier. Start, you want to move and you want to go north, take Temple of Adioth, build up your army, then slowly progress around the corner. If you can, you want to kill off the Dark Elves. If you can't, that's not a problem. You can't hold Hold Fortress or any of these. So just raise them and hopefully they don't get colonized by somebody. Be aware that up here, Taurus the Iron Bull will start, which means that we'll be getting chaos corruption in these provinces and he will invade you. It is worth marching up and trying to kill him off by taking Gorog 4. If you can kill his faction off completely, great. If you can't, at least you will drive him away from your borders. If he comes into your borders, totally wipe him out. So, the unique mechanics of the Sisters of Twilight, they again have offices. They are different than what Orion does. And you can obviously see what they do. They're a little bit more about the spell weavers, spellcaster type stuff. They're very interesting to play with, sisters. We'll look at the sister unit in a minute, but basically, you want to at least control these 3 settlements. Ideally, these 4. Wouldn't worry too much about Plane of the Spiders. If you can be friends with the Exiles of Nehek, do so. I found my test couple runs, they tended to attack me regardless of what I wanted to have happen. Other than that, get your garrison, get your growth, build up. There's not a huge difference for them. They do have another unique mechanic, which is the Forge of Daleth. Now, this builds charges after you. It can build charges after you win battles. Doesn't always. You can then spend the charges to buy gear. The gear you can spend it on starts weak, but can level up. And you've got different categories that each have their different effects. Dragon here tends to, support LA a little bit more. The eagle up here is all about range type stuff for the main characters, not your army. Twilight, which I tend to use more, tends to buff your army and weaken the enemies. Plus 15% missile strength is great, in my opinion. And then the dreaming is about upkeep, replenishment, and stuff. I don't tend to use it that much. And then if you've leveled up all your stuff, you've nothing else to do, you can spend it on these blessings. They last 5 turns. They cost a favor. They're pretty useful, what you want to do. Now, you have another option where you can, having a artifact, you can reforge it temporarily to gain a large bonus, higher than a level 3 bonus. Costs 2 reforges. I tend not to use it. If I was in some serious trouble, by all means, it would be worth using to get a significant boost. I find it much more useful to have the constant passives. Ideally, you want to build passives that boost your army, decrease your upkeep, or debuff the enemy. I like this one for the -10 enemy leadership, is just really great for routing. Overall, you want to build them up. They should auto-equip to your Sisters of Twilight. If they don't, just be aware that you have to go in sometimes and add them. Very easy to add them. At some point, you will get an event where you will get Ariel. Ariel is arguably one of the strongest heroes in the game. She's very powerful. She is immortal. She has some crazy buffs to her army. It's worth sticking her in with the Sisters of Twilight almost immediately. Her stats are just solid for melee. She's got bonuses, corruption, growth, construction, recruitment rank, faction wide. She's got these great blessings, making her unbreakable, decreasing the cost of her magic, making her hit harder. She boosts. She has a couple abilities. She has Oak of Ages, which is a spell that she can cast. It does some pretty decent explosion damage, weakens the enemy. She can boost it even further with these. Dart of Doom is like a giant magic missile. It can hit hard, not great against armor, but does some substantial magic damage. Makes her pretty good about killing enemy lords. Berry Wine heals her and maybe her allies. I tend to use it on her since she's unroutable and half decent in combat. If she gets into combat, she doesn't die and she stays alive. Terrible and Beautiful is great. It She can hex hit enemies in the area, reduce their leadership, and she can boost her melee and armor pen attacks. She's got access to a large range of spells. Some heal, some do damage, some have general spells. All the factions can get aerial. The sisters, she was designed to be part of the Sisters of Twilight from the Total Warhammer 2 DLC. And then she gets all these nice bonuses when she casts spells later on. It's worth getting them. Cast spells, do damage. Definitely get her replenished troops if you feel the need. In general, she's just a very good one to add to her army. She looks really impressive. You'll see she's got all these various talismans. She recovers very quickly. She hits hard. She controls corruption. She grows. She does damage. She's hard to kill. She reduces. She's just amazing. Let's be fair. If there's anything about the Wood Elves that needs to be nerfed, it's probably Ariel. All told, as you can see, I'm doing the Gaian Veil strategy. By the time I completed healing one forest, the Oak of Ages was around 190 or so, and it's obviously growing at 4 turn now because I healed a forest. Plus, Orion's done a half decent job being friends with his neighbors. Or actually, me being friends with his neighbors, because for some reason, and I don't know if it's a glitch, I have the Oak of Ages with other Wood Elf factions. I don't know if that was intentional or not. It does make it harder to defend if it was to get attacked. Plus, everyone around it knows I exist. I've made friends with Tonya and the other elves, so that helps. You'll see, got a very strong garrison, and I've leveled it up as fast as I can. So that is the sister. Oh wait, we got to look at the actual Sisters of Twilight unit. My bad. Sisters of Twilight are unique because they are 2 units as one. They appear that way. They kind of fight as 1 unit though. They're good at melee, as you'll see. They're good at range. They hit hard. At some point, they get you can get a mount. Let's show. I can't remember offhand. Anyway, they can get a mount that they can basically have a flying unit on. They hit hard. They have the standard tree here, obviously healing and replenishment, good on them. They have some their unique abilities are nice. They have Challenge to Dice, which has a better chance of getting favor. They have Ward Save. They recover very quickly. They tend to be wounded only for 1 to 2 turns usually. They also can get a boost with just all the elves. This is a way to keep the dark elves or the high elves from killing you. They move further, they replenish more. They have the Guardian ability. This is great for keeping Ariel alive. This one helps you heal faster and ambush. This one boosts flying units. These are oddly enough the elf faction that's kind of about flying archers. Might want to consider using them more. And then further up, they have ward save for their entire army and some cast spells as well. It's worth using. They're very powerful. Their abilities upkeep for missiles, bonus damage to flying units, like combat, and their faction abilities are ammunition. They get all their flying hawk riders have the volley of Kronos sniping magic missile ability. Okay, here we are. Durthu. We're back in Athel Loryn. He controls the northern settlement and, of course, Oak of Ages at the beginning. His base is Waterfall Palace. He starts at war with the dwarves. Basically, he's got a grievance against the dwarves. You want to ideally take the dwarves out. Downside is, of course, occupying the land is not as powerful, but it does get you the Heathlands going, and honestly is an easier way to build your Heathlands than Orion does. Downside is you start at war with these guys, and eventually you end up at war with the Greenskins, who have a nice short marching route to your settlement, like Orion's, which take more than a turn. Durthu's faction is pretty much all about tree units, and it's cheaper for him to recruit branchways. He does more melee damage in fighting in the woods. Personally, Durthu is a non-ranged unit, which is unique for the elves, that he is a powerful melee hitter. He hits hard. He's got some abilities himself. His special passives are all the units in his army are immune to attrition. This means even if you're in the middle of the chaos wastes, you don't lose units, which is great. For spirits, your tree units are reduced upkeep. units have much better melee. If you want to play a melee Wood Elf faction, this is the guy you should probably play it with, not Orion or Sisters of Twilight. His personal stuff, he has a boost that boosts Treekin and Dryad's armor piercing, which is very nice because it means the Wood Elves don't suffer fighting armor as much. He also has 20% ward save for Treekin unit. Treekin unit under Durthu are super hard kill. I'm just going to be really honest, they are. He's also the type of person who probably Howl of the Forest to boost all his melee units' ability to hit harder is very useful on. But obviously do defense as well. I find the offense a little bit more useful, especially since you've got ward save. But if you want Immortal Treekin unit, by all means, go ahead and use this. He charges at the head or in the middle of a Treekins in Dryads into the enemy lines and then slaughters them while his few elven archers pepper them afar. He has the standard tree here, as you'll see. He has the very standard melee tree that the Wood Elves get. Obviously, he's already pretty good. I will mention Tempered Rigor here boosts both his melee attack and defense ridiculously well. He's a very powerful melee lord. He also has access to spellcasting, which is a bit unique for an elf lord. He gets access to, I think this is the Beast Tree. Never remember the name of them. It's not amazing, but snagging a couple of them can be useful, especially the melee defense and physical resistance stuff, because it can affect allies in an area. Makes your tree units even stronger. Fully upgraded, he gets increased cooldown to his magic missile, Lamentation of Despairs, which is a fairly powerful one that pierces armor. He also gets bonus leadership when he's laying siege against enemy and factions, which is kind of cool. Physical resistance during forest battles. He's very good at defensive if people try and invade your forest. Plus, he buffs the melee defense of all his armies if he's under attack, which is cool. Increased armor for his tree units. Fire resistance, because, yeah, you could burn them to death with spells or Skaven flamethrowers. It would hurt. Rage of Kurnos. Decreased towards beast magic. Very nice. Oaken Heart. Vigor loss reduction. Very solid. Your treemen will fight longer without taking damage, boost if you're attacking, and Awaken the Woods. This, if enemy armies are in the region, they take damage. Kind of like the upgraded tree ability that you get from repairing one of the Sisters of Twilight or other forests. His unique building in his capital is decreased cost to building and recruitment cost for Treekin. Other than that, everything else is basically the same as the others. You're just more likely to go down Haunted Grove than anyone else. I do not believe his garrisons are any different. I've not actually looked into that now that I think of it. The other thing to note is that he has, again, different offices. His office boosts the Ancient Treeman lords if you're going to recruit some of them. He also has a variety of different ones. They tend to boost upkeep, control corruption, and in general just make your armies a little bit more defensive. The 20% upkeep is really nice on the defense, I will point out. Otherwise, it doesn't really buff your armies immensely well. I think he is probably the weakest offices other than the upkeep. But that's my opinion. Waterfall Palace is slightly more vulnerable than some of the other elven forests, not as much as Sisters of Twilight. But your plan, take out the dwarves, finish them off here. I would recommend setting up elven outposts there. They tend not to get attacked unless, say, the Skaven invade. If you can, make friends with Bretonia. Otherwise, you're probably going to end up fighting Grom Launch over here. And you'll get Confederation missions. And I again recommend the same strategy as Orion. Wait till Gain Vale becomes open. Taking a forest for free and colonizing it after fighting a Chaos army, much easier than wiping out a Wood Elf faction or some of the other battles. Plus, it's a safe location. Once you've got two, then you probably want to expand again to Loryn Forest and then Orion's camp down below. That is pretty much Durthu. I won't say he's as interesting as some of the other factions, but boy, does he hit hard in melee combat. Okay, time for the last of the current Wood Elf lords, or ladies, in the case of them. I fully expect for another Wood Elf Lord to appear at some point in this game. So for now, this is the last one, and this is probably the most interesting of the Wood Elf factions. This is Drycha, the War Grove of Woe, the Dryads of Hathi. Um, this is again similar to Durthu, is a tree spirit human leader. The difference is Drycha hates elves, and she's a Wood Elf leader. It's kind of weird. Basically, your Wood Elf units. First off, you're penalized getting along with other Wood Elves, which makes confederating them outside of missions rather difficult. Your Elven armies take one more upkeep. She does start with one Amber, though, which I tend to use to improve relations with all the factions, considering she starts surrounded by factions. It's up to you, though. However, her elf units are glamored, where they can't fight as well, which is a nasty penalty, but they are expendable, so losing elf units does not lower the leadership of your treeman units if the elves die. And your tree spirit units, Dryad, Treekin, Treeman, are cheaper. Okay. Drycha starts in the Griffin Wood here. You're surrounded by the Empire on all sides. There's some ogres to your west. What tends to happen, in my opinion, is that this area up here that you start at war with, Ostermark, tends to fall either to Kislev, Greenskins, or more than likely the vampire counts south. Interestingly enough, Drycha gets along fairly well with the vampire counts, and it can be worthwhile early on seeking a non-aggression pact with them. At which point, they tend to kind of leave you alone. Unlike a lot of other factions, you're not as heavily injured by corruption because you get corruption reduction, and your minor settlements make no money, so you don't have to tax them anyway. So they have insane public order and corruption reduction regardless. Her capital, once you complete the ritual, she gets immune to vampiric attrition, which just, of course, makes it more useful for you to be friends with the vampires. And she unlocks some access to malevolent units. Her tree units are different than Durthu. Instead, she has malevolent ones, which are, I guess, more offensive than defensive. I haven't gone through and compared each one of them, but the unique thing is you can buy aspects of upgrades on them. For example, you could buy aspect of the birch, do armor piercing, but more vulnerable to physical damage. Be aware, of course, they start with some physical resistance, so you're not making them super weaker. Aspect of the oak, armor. This is great if you're fighting Cav. Aspect of the willow, better against defense if you're not fighting armor, like Skaven, Greenskins, or early Empire units. Make them stronger there. Same thing applies to your Malevolent Treeman. Obviously, the numbers change slightly. Considering base weapon strength up 250 damage, the make your Treeman hit really hard early game at the cost of not being able to fight weapon-wise later on. And again, here the numbers change. Some of them are slightly different. Most of them have armor piercing, defense, and then either anti-cav, anti-large defense, or increased damage. In terms of Drycha's moves, he starts with a level 2 settlement, which is nice. I recommend getting a guard platform. Clicking on Drycha herself, first off adding her glamored elf unit here. See if we can do the elf stats. See, glamour reduces melee attack and reload skill. This very much disincentivizes you from using archers as much. The elven archers are still powerful and they're worth using. Just be aware that they are going to be weaker. You can't just have massed elf archers killing everything. Drycha also has the ability on her first turn to get an ogre mercenary unit. I recommend hiring it. It's a very nice boost. Drycha also can recruit wild spirits, very similar to how the vampire counts just raise units, or the vampire coast as well, which kind of implies, and considering she gets immunity to vampiric attrition, should kind of be friends with the vampires because similar to them, her own choice. She has access to a few different units compared to the normal Wood Elf ones that replenish every once in a while. She has giant wolves. Think a light, cheap cav unit that is very solid in combat. They've got pretty good stats, can't damage armor, you can get cave bats. I believe they are better than the vampire count bat unit. They're still not amazing, but they do, if you look at the bottom here, they do cause fear. In fact, all Drycha's units tend to cause fear in some way, shape, or form, which is very nice. Some, in fact, inspire terror, which is great. You can also get manticores, are hard to get. Giant great hawks, which are great hawks are different than great eagles. They're weaker flying units. They still have their place, and then giant spiders, which are pretty decent units. They have poison to weaken people, and then they get feral bears, which are just kind of awesome. Who doesn't want feral bear units? They hit hard. They're anti-large. They're armor piercing. You can recruit them instantaneously. They're pretty neat. Basically, this allows Drycha turn 1 build out her army to 13, which means taking out these Skaven um, is a lot easier. You could already take them out with your starting army, but now you can take them out. If you hire the bats, you'll lose the bats, but your army will still be strong. Then you can either take out the Skaven, which honestly I recommend because who wants Skaven in your lands? As you can see, you can just auto-resolve your way through it. You do have a slight dilemma as Drycha. It can be hard to hold the magic forests outside of your capital, which means raising them is not a huge issue. They'll get recolonized and you can raise them again. Occupying them gets a little bit harder to defend them. I still recommend early on you occupy them and then probably, to be honest, I would recommend waystones rather than world route pathways. Drycha can recruit, obviously, her armies instantaneously, and they're not far from her lands. She can get there in one turn, pretty much, or two. And honestly, having the garrison to defend against the Empire or if the vampires come at war with you is quite useful. Then I'd expand over here, take out this, take out this. If you can take Breachhofen, you can. I find once I take the second settlement here, Eschen, they tend to plead for peace. If they plead for peace, honestly, I would give it to them. They're only going to be replaced by Warriors of Chaos, Norska, Greenskin, or Vampire counts. Um, Leaving them alive longer, even if they're neutral, um, can allow you some breathing space to build up and strengthen your forest. You could keep killing them and just ambushing their armies to build up your forest quicker. It's really a strategy up to you. Um, yeah, it's pretty much Drycha's strategy. Looking at Drycha herself, um, her Dryad units are stronger. She has the ability Roust Wrath, which I will point out, allows her to summon a Dryad unit, which is kind of nice. Summoning units is always a solid strategy. She can boost her units that she can instantly recruit, the various people of the forest, make them hit harder, armor piercing, charge. Scent of Blood just adds them frenzy, which makes them hit a lot harder. Between these two, your cheap cave bats, Pheromanticores, giant spiders hit hard and they're cheap. Plus, this decreases the cost of recruiting them. Standard Wood Elf growth tree. I would recommend a little bit more along the lines of combat. I might even do Lightning Strike. Drycha can get invaded by multiple armies later on in the game. Really up to you, though. Is access to the Shadow Tree rather than X-Men Magic Tree. Penumbral Pendulum can be pretty powerful. Hit of Shades is always worthwhile. If you get enemies, drop this on them, you'll do tons of damage. Outside of that, she's okay in melee combat. She's got the same melee boost as Durthu does. She's less durable, though, than he is, being a bit more of a spellcaster and her army being stronger. Finally, she has her unique tree up here. Boosts her tree units even stronger. Allows to summon dryads further. They no longer degrade. Boosts her weapon strength, charge damage. Pageant of Strikes is quite interesting. It can be very useful against range units, or I'm not entirely sure if it affects artillery, but if it does, it would be very strong. You can use it to weaken enemy archers, other Wood Elves in particular. Indoctrinator changes the glamour on all your elves. So if you want to use the elves, I would change that sooner. It basically gets rid of the penalty for them being glamored and instead boosts their leadership. If you want to use elf units as this faction, you want to get this level 13 basically. Plus terror when you ambush in your forest, which is always nice, and ambush chance. Of course, most of your units cause fear anyway, but terror is nice. Terror is much stronger. Boost to for tree mages, and then Mantra of the Fallen. Your enemies get reduced leadership based off your elven units if you're fighting elves. I'm not entirely sure how this functions. Wording is very strange. Honestly, I don't tend to fight other wood elves. I think it reduces other elven armies you're fighting. Applying to dark elves and high elves, I don't know. If someone knows in the comments, by all means, let me know. Strengthens your treeman and then allows you to cast Routes for Wrath, Wrath again, and gives you infinite range, which is amazing. The enemy has artillery. Once you engage in the battle, you summon it behind the enemy lines into your artillery. During the branch, again, makes your tree better at fighting, and you get ward save for tree units. Overall, I think Drycha is a better version of Durthu, although less tanky. Just don't use as many Wood Elf units early on. Instead, use her various summons. You can create an army very quickly. You can overrun this area. Trying to hold this area is a pain. If need be, just retreat back to your woods. This is one of the few factions I might actually build spell singer trees, not only because it's a bonus to them, but also for the forest healing that you can get out of here. You're going to want to leave a garrison here the whole game, though. If Chaos succeeds pushing through Kislev into the Northern Empire, you will get attacked. They really don't like you. And I believe... oh yeah, I think I mentioned that she has a different tree here. This one allows you to get rid of the glamour early on. Decrease to Dryads if you want to fight with Dryads. Again, boosts to other things. Drycha herself has bonuses when you fight the elves. Again, different office. But I believe that's it for the Wood Elves factions. Again, I would do the same strategy. Get Gaian Vale from Alariel early on. Then Loryn Forest maybe. Or if you want to go rogue and fight other people, invade other areas. Either way, I would wait to get to Oak of Ages for some time. You do not start with ownership of it, which right now, I don't know if it was a bug for the other factions. It's kind of nice. Because the other Wood Elves hate you, they would probably attack and kill it, which is probably why she doesn't start with it. So wait till this is almost healed before invading, because you'll probably have to fight Orion or even Durthu. Think of it this way. Basically, Drycha hates elves. There's a whole lore reason behind it. I'm not going to go into it. Have fun. I like playing her. Much more skirmishy war fighting than the other Wood Elves. And that is it for the Wood Elf factions. Hopefully this helps you understand them, their starting locations and abilities. Slow building, very defensive, but very powerful. And hope to see you all in another guide. If you've watched this far, please do like and subscribe. And if you want to see more guides and stuff, let me know what you'd like to see guides on. Ring the bell so you get notified. And thanks for watching. I hope to see you in another video. Bye for now.